Okie dokie, everybody. Here we go. We are here again with another round of the Astro-Babble. Happy Wednesday. I hope that you're having a fantastic week. For all of you who are joining me on Facebook and Instagram, thank you so much for continuing to support the live stream. It's really fun to continue to do this with you. Just as a reminder, I dropped a daily horoscope for the first time on Facebook and Instagram. So if you're online and would like to look at some of my new content, just check the posts and let me know what you think about the 12 sign, just couple sentence horoscopes that I pumped out this morning. But we are here to focus on 8 charts, just like we do every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning. 8 charts that have been donated by you, my lovely followers. If you would like to be a part of the live stream, you can always private message me your birth date, place, exact birth time, and we'll add you to the list. And likewise, if you'd like to work privately, you can always just go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, which is my website. But for now, let's pop open the fizzy water and go ahead and get started. And we're going to start with Sage. Let's take a peek at Sage's chart. Okay, that's quite the choice, Sage. So Sage has got a Cancer ascendant, naturally making the moon, the ruler of Sage's chart, and Sage has put the moon up in Aries, quite the unique choice, in the 10th house of success, making Sage extremely driven, very driven, almost addicted to the idea of success, especially from an emotional validation perspective. But I like this choice for a couple reasons. The first is that he's put this moon in Aries, co-present with Jupiter in Aries in the 10th. And Jupiter is that planet of expansion, and especially when we put Jupiter in Aries, it really does double down on that leadership quality. On the harsher side, it does tend to put tyrant as a word I would associate with Sage, especially if that moon in Aries is denied what it wants, and especially earlier in life, the aggression of Aries, when it's blown up by Jupiter, can become very, very strong. Now, there are some other factors in the chart that might mediate that, but right off the bat, putting Cancer on the ascendant naturally makes somebody rather emotional and lunar focused. But to put that in the 10th, a house of striving, a house of success, a house of accomplishment, a house of being in the spotlight, in Aries with Jupiter in Aries, there's a follow me kind of energy that Sage is putting right off the bat in his chart. What I find absolutely lovely as I continue to kind of unpack this chart and look at it, is there's a mutual reception between Venus and Capricorn in the 7th and Saturn and Taurus in the 11th. Relationships will come very easy to Sage, but especially after that first Saturn return, relationships in general, there's going to be one relationship that will last for a very long time. Saturn is in this for the long haul when he touches the 7th house of relationships, but putting the 7th house of relationships with Venus in it is glorious in and of itself. But to put her in Capricorn and then put Saturn in Taurus in the 11th house of friendships, connecting the 7th and the 11th really brings long-term partners together. But it's also this idea of the partners that are chosen really, really last. Even if the relationship does dissolve, that doesn't necessarily end the friendship. And there's a substantial length to any partnerships that Sage would form because of that mutual reception, which is beautiful. So we have this Sun in Aquarius, Uranus in Aquarius as well, Neptune in Aquarius, South Node in Aquarius, all in the 8th house of business. It is interesting because there is this level of genius, to Sage, although the genius is not necessarily seen readily. What Sage should be working on this go-around is his North Node in the second, ruled by his Sun in Aquarius in the eighth. So there's this idea of actually needing to understand entrepreneurship, financial benefit, and becoming independent as a person, which really kind of goes back to our Moon in Aries, Jupiter in Aries, kind of ruling the chart. But what I want to kind of emphasize to Sage is, just because people don't understand you or they don't understand your motives does not mean that you're wrong. Yeah. However, there is going to be a gap that you need to fill as somebody who would like to be a leader, as somebody who would like to kind of Pied Piper the crowds. You as a person need to understand that if your message is lost in translation, nobody's going to want to hear it. You need to make it accessible. You need to make it grounded. You need to not just keep it all in your head and think that because it's there, everything will work out eventually and it's up to them to decode you. No, that's wrong. You need to make your information accessible, grounded, practical, and not necessarily make it so heady. I think this is also one of the reasons why you struggle intellectually and communication-wise. You have this Mars in Pisces and this Mercury in Pisces and MC in Pisces up in the ninth, ruling the third house of communication. There's this lost in translation effect in your life that tends to really take over more so than not. And I think that that's going to be one of the biggest weaknesses in your chart, is we have this glorious leadership quality that's coming through with the Cancer ascendant, Moon in Aries, Jupiter in Aries. But then when we start to unpack your Aquarius Sun, when we start to unpack your detrimented Mercury, your Mars in Pisces, a lot of your leadership qualities tend to get washed away when you hit people with that really that brainiac side of you, that higher education, holier than thou kind of side of you. And I think that you need to tone that down. You need to really make it grounded, make it practical, and not be so aloof that people feel like you're unreachable. Yeah. That's really going to be one of the greatest struggles of your life, is that ninth house of spirituality, higher education, foreigners, travel. Having Mars, a fiery sign, which would normally indicate action, being drowned in the sign of Pisces, and then Mercury in Pisces, which is in the sign of his detriment. There's this waterlogged sensation when it comes to being too intellectual, when it comes to normally people use the ninth house as a house of growth, as a house of culture, as a house of expanding their worldview. But every time that you try to tap into that knowledge base, it just seems to weigh you down. You're a natural leader, which is a very different thing from people who need to be trained in leadership. So as long as you're able to focus on communication, focus on sharing your ideas in a way that is accessible and more grounded, and not getting lost in translation because you have so many ideas and not the words to back them up, that's going to be the major challenge of the life. Cool. Thank you, Sage. I appreciate you. Good morning, Laurel. Good morning, everybody on Instagram who's joining. Let's take a look at Tevin's chart. So Tevin is number 2 in our live stream. 29-degree ascendant, making me nervous. But I'm always comforted by a non-5 birth time, and what I mean by that is, people often give me birth times that are like 3 a.m., 2 a.m., 5 a.m., and I'm like, no, very rarely are you born on the dot like that, even on the 5s or the 30s. But to see a 5:12 p.m. birth chart, I'm put at ease by that, for sure, even though it is a 29-degree ascendant. Putting the ruler of the chart as the Sun. The Sun is in the 8th house, co-present with the South Node, Mercury, and Venus. It's interesting. Because we've got the Sun in Pisces, which is normally very watery, very intuitive, very spiritual. Putting it in the 8th house of death is quite the choice from that perspective. Naturally gives mediumship qualities, but those mediumship qualities might be a little bit too turned up, because we do have Mercury in Pisces here, which is in the sign of his detriment, and he's also being combust the sun. So within 7.5 degrees on either side of the sun, if a planet enters that zone, it's said to be combust or to be overshadowed or burnt up by the sun's rays. However, we do also have Venus in Pisces here, who is in the sign of her exaltation, the most favored sign for Venus to be in. So there's this contrast, and then we have this South Node in the 8th house as well, which is normally a point of purging, of weakness, and so we have like helpful and not helpful, helpful, not helpful kind of energies happening in that 8th house of business, taxes, estates, death, that kind of stuff. And then the 2nd house of finance being ruled by that Mercury. It really, the more I look at it, the more I really think the intuitive work should be centered around that experience. Yeah, because the more we tap into the intuitive space of Pisces, the more we start to understand the deeper layers of that chart. One of the reasons why Mercury falls apart in Pisces is because it's opposing his natural rulership of Virgo. Mercury loves Virgo because it's detail-oriented. It's able to focus a lot of those mutable energies which Mercury rules and get things done and accomplished, which is where Tevin is really striving towards this go-around, especially in the 2nd house of wealth and finance. But to have this watered down Mercury, it really does submerge the mind and puts the entire neurosystem in a fishbowl. And that's something that can be of detriment, but if it's taken from a spiritual or a psychic context, then that would actually be quite favorable, because it's somebody who can kind of traverse the depths of the astral layers of our world and pull out some really nice information from it. So I'm going to go with that interpretation, because that seems a little bit more workable, a little bit more helpful. We have a Moon in Aquarius, Jupiter in Aquarius, and Uranus in Aquarius, all in the 7th house. Tevin, when you signed up for your relationships, I really didn't expect you to go all out, balls to the wall, with metaphoric balls to the wall, with so much of that grandiose, unpredictable energy. Aquarius is a sign that's known for genius. It is that air sign that's very intellectual based, but at the same time, to put Jupiter and Uranus in Aquarius in the 7th, you're in for a wild ride with whatever spouse you choose. And that spouse might not necessarily be in the best state, period, because we do have Saturn in Aries, which is in the sign of his detriment in the 9th house of travel, spirituality, foreigners, higher education. And that detrimented Saturn from the 9th is ruling the 7th. So this idea of having somebody who did previously work in higher education, but unfortunately falls from that post, or somebody who is not necessarily very spiritual, or somebody who struggles a lot with those concepts of spirituality or foreigners or travel. It's difficult, especially with that Saturn being in mutual reception with a detrimented Mars in the 3rd house in Libra retrograde. That's messy. You've put a lot of mess connected with the 7th house, and there is help on the way, especially with that Mars, because Venus is ruling it from a high point of exaltation. But I'm not sure if that's going to be enough. The more I look at your relationships, the more I really start to think of like you living in such a liminal realm, you living in such a Piscean world that's all astral realms and spiritual discussions and beings who are not physically present. And then you bring somebody into your life who's almost too grounded, who's almost too strict, who's not necessarily seeing things the way you see them, but to your detriment. So being attracted to those types of people, we just need to make sure that the spouse that you choose does not compromise all of this lovely Piscean mutability, and instead works to really ground you, but not in a way that takes away your power. Be a good way to say it. Yeah, communication in words might be a little bit difficult. Again, that Mars in his detriment in Libra retrograde in the third house of writing, teaching, communication. That's going to be a tricky placement to overcome because it is Mars at his worst in that third house. So understanding that communication might need a little bit more effort, pair that with the detrimented Mercury in Pisces, combust the Sun. There's a lot of remediation that needs to be done in the communication and words department. I would really make sure that you study language. I would really make sure that you read a lot. I would really make sure that you learn how to use words to your favor, because you could have the most talented gifts in the world, but if you can't communicate, if you can't orate, if you can't relay what it is that you're experiencing, then the world's just going to pass you by. And that's very similar to the first chart that we saw, but this chart has even more difficulty in the communication department, because again, in that third house, we have the Mars that is in Libra retrograde, really just, that action-oriented planet is then dispersed by Libra and going backwards. And then we have Mercury in Pisces combust the Sun via the 8th, where you've put your chart ruler, the Sun in Pisces, co-present with the South Node. There's so much of a black hole that's swirling around the communication dynamic. We'd need to work with Mercury remediation. We'd need to work with Mars remediation. We need to really delve into your chart and help you to understand how you can't just float by like a jellyfish in this Piscean realm of the 8th house, which you've crafted so beautifully with an exalted Venus. It's flawless. I love it. I'm such a fan. But we need to ground that. We need to make that exchangeable, practical. We need to make sure that your spouse isn't taking over that dynamic and telling you that you're full of crap. Like, there's so much that we need to work with in the chart, but you have the makings of just such a beautiful spiritual life ahead of you. I'm very excited to see what you're going to do with it down the road, but there are challenges that cannot be ignored at this point astrologically. Okie dokie, Tevin, thank you so much for donating your chart to science. Lucia, oh, he's a business major, so funny. Hilarious. Thank you for giving that feedback on the first chart. I love it. Let's go to Kalandra, my dear, our third chart of the morning. Cheers. How are you? We have a Scorpio rising. Fabulous. Scorpio rising co-present in the first house with Uranus in Scorpio retrograde. That's a little bit of an ouchies, not necessarily a fan of that. But the ruler of the chart is going to be Mars. Mars in the 7th in Taurus, co-present with Venus in Taurus. It's quite the interesting dynamic, my dearest Kalandra. I'm interested in why you feel relationships are the reason for your existence, especially when you've gone out of your way to make some interesting and not necessarily favorable things happen in that department. So putting the ruler of your chart in the 7th house of relationships really does mean that you're here to navigate that space. You feel very, very in love with the idea of love, and having a Venus in Taurus here is very, very like it really paints you out to be this earth goddess archetype. But at the same time, you have this detrimented Mars or this fallen Mars in the sign that is opposing his natural rulership of Scorpio in the 7th as well. Co-present Venus and Mars do also talk to me about gender identity and either bisexuality or the idea of gender confusion being part of that 7th house relationship dynamic, which is always a really interesting thing. And you're no stranger to things being mysterious or unpredictable with this Uranus in Scorpio retrograde in your first house as well. There's a lot of unpredictability when it comes to not just the relationship realms, but the sexual realms as well. We have a lot of interesting kind of Mars, Scorpio, Venus stuff happening, which does bring a lot of the sensuality, a lot of the intimacy forward, but not necessarily in a way that you would expect, because Uranus deals with unpredictability, and a Mars that is in his fall does not necessarily have the true masculine potency that we would like him to have. Instead, he's softened, he's earthened, he's grounded by that Taurus, which tends to bring in different elements at play. It wouldn't surprise me as well if you worked from a health perspective with couples or fertility as well. You would be an excellent doula. an excellent doula. And when I say an excellent doula, I mean an excellent doula. The fifth house of sexuality and parenting and children is ruled by this very strong Jupiter in Leo up in the 10th house, which I find glorious, as well as Mars and Taurus in the 7th, ruling your 6th house of health, pets, work. So the idea of you being a birthing coach or working with couples, working with marriage, being a matchmaker, working in the doula space, like relationships in general, such an important part of your chart dynamic. Emotions tend to be a little bit tricky for you because you have put your moon in Libra in the 12th, as well as Pluto in Libra in the 12th. Although it is ruled by that really nicely placed Venus, I think that we need to understand that, your role as a peacekeeper, your role as somebody who strives for fairness can be easily lost when you don't apply that same level of fairness to yourself as you do for others. It's difficult because that moon in Libra in the 12th attached to that Venus really does talk to me about a savior complex. And that savior complex is often one-sided. It's not necessarily as balanced as Libra normally is, because that 12th house is a house of confusion. It really does bring forward this idea of you seeking to help others find balance, but not necessarily turning that balance onto yourself. So we would need to make sure that that's a big part of your internal work, is not just caring for others in that way, but also making sure that you're able to receive love, that you're able to seek out self-care, that you let other people do to you what you do to them, and create that safety, that intimacy, that sacred space that comes so easily to you. Yeah, that's it. Chart went cold. Okay, cool. Thank you, Kalandra. I appreciate you very much for donating your chart to science. Hello, my dear. Thank you for joining us. Let's move on to chart number 4, which is going to be Laurel. Laurel. Goodness gracious. Great Pisces on fire. Oh my gosh. Laurel. Girl, what have you done? So you've put your ascendant in Pisces. You've also put your sun in Pisces, 1 degree, less than 1 degree away from the ascendant, making you a double Pisces. And then you've decided to put the Lord of your chart, Jupiter, at 0 degrees in Pisces in the first as well. That's some serious Pisces energy, girl. Serious Pisces energy. And then to put your moon in Scorpio up in the 9th of spirituality, girl. The level of intuition is ridiculous. The level of spirituality is ridiculous. You're just like a walking medium. I can't with you. You're so psychically conductive. If you have not realized this, I'm shocked, because it's so present in your chart. Absolutely ridiculous. Boundary issues out the wazoo, though. And I talk to you as well as a triple water sign. Like, we need to help you understand how to deal with this water if you have not already. The level of emotion, the level of intuition, the level of absorption that you carry energetically is just absolutely off the charts. I cannot with you. There's just so much of this water. I love it because my chart is so watery, but if it can pose a unique threat to your experience, because if you don't know how to ride that wave, it can really drown you, for sure. But there are rules. There are rules. Whenever I have a client who comes in to see me, and we talk about their sun, moon, ascendant being in a triple element, there are certain rules, there are certain yeses and nos that you have to be able to navigate in life. And for water signs, it's very much about saying no to excess social interaction, saying no to the wrong people, saying yes to the right people, saying yes to self-care when you care so much for other people, knowing how much you take on from a room when you enter it, knowing how physically taxed you become, especially because all of this is happening in Pisces in the sign of the lymphatic system. There's a lot of immune activity that's in your chart right off the bat, especially with the sun ruling your 6th house of health. It wouldn't surprise me if at some point in time you have developed or had a brush with autoimmune issues, because your immune system is just that powerful. There's just a lot in your chart that needs to be understood. It's powerful, it's magical. Magical would be a great word for it. But at the same time, again, there are rules for a triple water sign with the Lord of the Ascendant in a water sign in the 1st house, especially when it's Jupiter, when we think of Jupiter's effect on water, like just making things big, like you basically have a tsunami in your chart is a good way to say it. So we got to master that water, and I think if we master that water, everything else will come into place. But that Jupiter is also ruling some fabulous, interesting stuff with Neptune and Sag up in the 10th, North Node and MC up in the 10th. It wouldn't surprise me if fame was something that came to you very easily. Fame was something that came to you when you were younger as well. Having the ruler of the 10th in the 1st as well as the chart ruler, it just makes you, again, very magical. It just makes you very charismatic. It makes you very, very easy to throw into the spotlight. It also, from a spiritual perspective, like you would do very great with what I'm doing now, like sharing your spiritual gift on social media in the public eye, because it's just such a big part of who you are. I think that's such a large chunk of your chart. It's ridiculous. Mercury in Aquarius, Venus in Aquarius in the 12th, ruling the 8th, the 3rd, the 4th. And where's Virgo, the 7th? Being attracted to people who have a lot of growing to do is something that I understand why you did that to yourself, because it does focus very heavily on you learning the lessons vicariously through them, because that's like when we think of your chart as being very jellyfish-like, whenever I see a lot of Pisces, jellyfish is really the big thing that comes into my head, because jellyfish, although they can propel themselves, they are steered by the currents, and they basically are opportunistic feeders. They sting and absorb whatever comes their way, and that's very much the way that Pisces focuses their psychic energy, just picking up what's around them. So you having a partner or being attracted to a partner who's very involved in self-growth will also remind you that you need to be working on yourself, instead of just kind of floating endlessly in the ether, endlessly, aimlessly. The fame stuff, that's a big thing. What else do we want to talk about? Second house of finance is ruled by this Mars in Gemini in the 4th. If there was a divorce in the family, actually, the more I look at this, we have both malefics in Gemini as well as South Node in Gemini in the 4th. One of the reasons why I think catapulting into the 10th house of fame and success is such a logical progression for your chart, Laurel, is because of all of these dry, hard energy that you needed to tackle in your 4th house of family, especially with Mercury in Aquarius ruling that 4th from the 12th. You're naturally suspicious of family. It's something that you view them as untrustworthy, is a good way to say it. It's not to say that those relationships can't be mended, because they can, especially with that Saturn at 27 degrees in a perfect trine mutual reception to Mercury. There is this idea of them being a big part of your journey that you need to be able to learn from, because a lot of the ways that they view the world are very concrete and mental and easy for you to learn from a grounded perspective. Sometimes a limited viewpoint is a healthier viewpoint in certain circumstances, as opposed to being so cosmically tapped in. We need to zoom out, yes, but we also need to learn how to zoom in, and they're very, very good at zooming in and learning those skills, despite potential harm that might have come to you in early years. Another thing is they will always be attached to your finance. When we see the Lord of your second house, which is Mars, in Gemini in the fourth, the idea that income will always be tied to the family situation, that's going to be a big part of the journey as well. Okay, I think that's where we're going to stop with Laurel. Thank you, Laurel, very much for donating your charts to science. I appreciate it very much. Yes, so we are on. Oh, baby. Well, I would say I'm shocked that you're in tears, Laurel, but we know that as such a strong water sign that the tears are just right behind the eyes at any given moment. I'm glad that you enjoyed the experience. Yes, so Elizabeth, if you would like, if any of you would like to be on the live stream, if you would like to add your name to the list, just private message me your birth date, place, and exact birth time, and I will add you to the list. However, if you would like to work with me privately and not have your chart shown on social media, and maybe support my work by scheduling a paid session, which is always helpful, you can go to, oops, I forgot to put the Zoom camera on Facebook. Anyway, so here's my face as I say these things. Yes, if you would like to actually work one-on-one professionally, just go to my website, which is ScorpioRisingAstrology.com. You'll see the consultations page. You can see my price list, what I offer, and sign up for a session just by submitting your birth date, place, and time through my website. So yeah, and also if you're interested in learning astrology, I have online downloadable classes, which are pre-recorded. You can access with click of a button. And yeah, that'll be great. So yeah, Elizabeth, if you'd like to have a paid session, just go to my website. Again, ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, which is also on my daily posts. And yeah, we'll get you on the books. Cool. Okay, so that's that. Let's continue. We're about halfway through. Let's go to chart number 5, which is my dear Rihanna. Okay. Well, my dear. So there's some conflict in the chart off the bat, and I think we need to discuss what this is and why this is. So we have the ascendant in Virgo, which naturally makes you very detail-oriented, very list-driven, very much of service to others is a big part of your dynamic. However, the Lord of your chart, as well as your Sun and your Mars, are in the 12th house of hidden enemies. We have Mercury in Leo, who has stationed just before retrograding, as well as the Sun in Leo and Mars in Leo in the 12th house. Normally, when we see the ruler of the chart in the 12th house of hidden enemies, there is an idea of self-consciousness and self-confidence being stifled, but also to put the ego, the planet, the Sun here, the planet of ego, it really does, especially in earlier years, indicate that as you started to understand who you were as a person, it was very, very difficult for you to form that sense of self-identity. Leos are naturally known to be that light in the darkness, so it was probably an easier time for you versus others, but at the same time, choosing to put the Sun in the 12th in his home sign, as well as the ruler of the chart, like you've definitely decided to do a lot of very intense healing work this time around. You've definitely decided to work with not just clarifying your own light, but helping other people find theirs. The 12th house is not naturally associated with the professions of nursing, hospitals, medicine, healing retreats, that sort of thing, working in mental institutions, jails. There's a lot of this, there's a lot of the torch-bearing energy that happens in the 12th house, but especially in people who have been compromised in their lives, either physically, mentally, and emotionally. And for you to identify so heavily with this house, I think 12th house themes are something that you should research and kind of get familiar with, because it's definitely a big part of who you've chosen to be this go around, as somebody who's able to traverse places that are often places of intense healing, places that are somewhat dangerous, places that are mysterious, and kind of the you've decided to be a fish in the cauldron of healing would be a good way to say it. And working with that imagery, I think, would be very helpful for you. Putting the moon in Sagittarius down in the 4th, as well as Uranus in Sagittarius retrograde down in the 4th. Not necessarily, not super a fan of that. But it does give you a wicked sense of humor, probably a sense of humor that you've inherited from your family. And I think that you've realized, especially through that unpredictability of the 4th house of family, that when in doubt, laugh it off. Worst that could happen is you're wrong, but the best that could happen is you shift your mood. That moon in Sag really does give you a really nice brightening of your chart, which I enjoy very much. Jupiter in Aquarius retrograde in the 6th. There is this idea of potentially you working in real estate. With your Aquarius ascendant, I really and especially Venus and Gemini ruling your 2nd, I'm getting this idea like you would be very, very good at cleaning, organizing, or designing other people's homes. That would be an excellent career profession for you, because you have this Venus and Gemini up in the 10th being ruled by your chart ruler in the 12th. That Virgo ascendant. Yeah, I think that would be an excellent profession for you to choose. You also being in business with your spouse is a thing, because we have that Jupiter in Aquarius ruling the 7th via Pisces. It's always nice when you have a partner who's willing to kind of spend all of their time with you, but that can also be a little bit annoying, that clingy tendency of a spouse that has that Pisces energy. So just be aware of that. Some of the most powerful parts of your chart are actually very hidden from you, and I'm not sure why you did this. The Venus and Gemini in the 10th is great. It's fabulous. It really does mean that you have good potential for success and fame in your chart. I enjoy that. But when it comes to that Venus ruling your North Node in the 9th, and then we also have Pluto in Scorpio, Saturn in Scorpio, South Node in Scorpio, down in the 3rd of communication, writing, teaching. I think there is this really strong ability for you to have a lot of education in your chart. And again, with your 12th house hospitalization stuff, you would do very well in the healthcare industry. Home healthcare, the idea as well, that would be excellent. But as that Saturn matures and as that Pluto matures, the itch for you to write, teach, and speak is going to continue to get fiercer and fiercer. So just watch for that, because as you unlock some of these skills and as you take some of these placements and mature them over time, there's going to be a very beautiful color palette that emerges that I think is really going to be quite valuable, especially when it comes to educating, healing, and helping other people with their personal crises and journeys and trauma that you are uniquely qualified to walk them through. For sure. Excellent. Thank you, my dear. I appreciate you donating your chart to science. Okay, so let's go ahead to chart number 6. We are looking at Charlotte. Charlotte with her Capricorn ascendant, North Node in Capricorn. Ruler of the chart in the 6th. Makes her quite the workaholic. When we see the ruler of the chart, especially Saturn, which is a very business-oriented, and Capricorn ruling the ascendant, that idea of the striving that Saturn does over time for the long haul of progression of projects. Putting that in the 6th house of work really does give this sense of somebody who takes a lot of pride in what they do, but also who attaches a lot of their identity to what they do as a profession. So that's something just to be aware of. We also have a very earthy moon, this moon at 12 degrees of Virgo. I'm a fan of that, the detail-orientedness of a moon in Virgo in the 9th, especially of higher education, spirituality, travels, foreigners. There's this worldliness that a moon in Virgo in the 9th brings, especially with memorizing details about history. Something that Capricorn is famous for as well, the memorization of the details. So that synastry plays nicely. I enjoy that. Both the Lord of the chart and the moon are being ruled by Mercury in Leo, co-present with Venus in Leo in the 8th of business, another business and entrepreneurial aspect, which is also making a trine to Neptune and Sag retrograde. That's an interesting dynamic, my dear. And where is Jupiter? Jupiter is down in Aquarius retrograde in the 2nd of finance. At 10 degrees, not opposing anything. There are no harsh aspects to it. Mars is going to go ahead and make a sextile to it, but that's a while back. Yeah, the entrepreneurship tendencies in this chart are very, very strong. I enjoy the way that you've strategically placed all of these chart aspects, Charlotte. I think it's smart. I think it's great. But one of the things that you'll be known for as you start to develop these placements, as you start to develop these kind of self-sufficient placements that you've done so well to cultivate and place and strategically market yourself as, is unpredictability and hidden power. Putting Pluto in Libra and Uranus in Libra, two outer planets that are not necessarily known to be the nicest, in the 10th house. There is this idea of you specifically coming to the table with all of your experiences and all of your work ethic, and just basically blowing people's plans sky high because you see business and strategy in a way that other people just can't. The details don't evade you like they do other people, and so you kind of go into these experiences of consulting and coaching other people, and you basically just derail all of their plans, but make them better at the same time. It's just, the catastrophic knows that you're able to drop with all of that Capricorn power and Saturn power and Mercury and Virgo power in your chart is just really fascinating and funny. I would love to sit in on one of those meetings with you, just to see you, just to watch you work and to watch the reactions of those who think that they're going in the right direction, and you explaining with all of your spreadsheets and PowerPoints and data that they are in fact going in the wrong direction. Charlotte, so when we have a sun in Cancer in the 7th, there is this idea of identifying very strongly with a spouse, but also with relationships in general, and the need for your ego to be satisfied with having somebody else in your life. If you choose to be single, if you choose to not be attached, the ego will constantly be on the search for somebody else to complete you, which is dangerous. You are a whole person. You are not weak in that way because you don't have somebody attached to you in this life experience. However, that sun in Cancer really does want somebody just to wrap you up in a comfy blanket and mother you in a way that, regardless of gender roles, somebody who has prominent Cancer placements can. Choosing to put the sun in Cancer in the 7th really does require your spouse to be an excellent caretaker. And I enjoy that dynamic for you, especially because you work so hard, especially because you have so much so many details that you go over on a day-to-day basis. It makes my head hurt. It makes my head hurting just thinking about it. But yeah, having that spouse that can bring that softness is definitely part of the equation in your chart. Now, one thing that I'd like to say before we wrap up with your chart is you do have Mars and Aries in the 4th, which is a very dramatic, militant formation in the 4th house. Your family life was very aggressive, very driven, very powerful, very strong, stern, not necessarily the picture-perfect aspect of love or softness. However, Mars is currently transiting your 4th house of family at this time, returning to its home sign of Aries. And so when we look at Mars over the next 6 months, continuing to really activate your 4th house of home and family, you seeking new real estate, you moving to new places, but you also specifically having a lot of family issues coming up at this time over the next 6 months is kind of part of your astrological forecast. Okay, Charlotte, thank you so much for donating your chart. We have Tara, my dear, how are you? As our 7th chart in the queue. Cheers. Interesting. So we have a very similar layout, except this is what I love about astrology, is we technically have a very similar layout to the last chart. Instead of Capricorn on the ascendant, we have Aquarius on the ascendant, but because Capricorn and Aquarius are both ruled by Saturn, Saturn is still the ruler of the chart. Saturn is also in the 6th house, just like the last chart. However, the sign dynamics are very different. Instead of Capricorn, which is cardinal earth, we have Aquarius, which is fixed air. The idea of hyperfocus, intelligence, mental activity, genius, but also quirkiness, and frustration due to the lack of understanding of us mortals to thy holy Aquarius self is part of the dynamic here. As well as Saturn being in the watery sign of Cancer, which is in the sign of its fall, or fall, because it's opposing Capricorn, which is its rulership. As well as Mars here, who is also in, this time Mars is in detriment, which is where I was getting that from, because Mars's exaltation is in Capricorn. So we have both malefics, both planets that we don't really like to touch, and they're struggling. They're both not very happy. They're very grouchy, and they're both kind of smothering. This is an excellent opportunity for us to discuss the harsher side of Cancer. When we see both malefics in Cancer in the 6th house, this is somebody who really understands how to put the mother in smother. And although Aquarius does give us a little bit of distancing, putting Mars and Saturn, especially Saturn ruling the chart, in bad spots in the 6th, you'd be excellent in caretaking professions, but at the same time, there are attachment issues, there are overbearing issues. The malefics in the 6th of not just work, but also health and pets. There's a theme of not being expressed appropriately, some bad luck in that department that we need to rectify, we need to heal, especially from a medical perspective. The idea of the nerves of Aquarius irritating the stomach of Cancer, especially with both malefics. There might be eating disorders, there might be food issues, there might be ulcers, there might be physical things that happen with the stomach that are not necessarily ideal because of that formation as well. We do have really nice leadership qualities, though. I really enjoy seeing a sun in Aries, which is the sign of its exaltation in the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication. Although you doing the grunt work is not necessarily ideal for you, Tara, you putting a very leadership-oriented sun in the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication, you'd be an excellent shift lead. You're a great delegator. You understand and respect other people's powers and their ability to do what is exceedingly frustrating to you. So I find that helpful, and I think that that's really where we start to remediate some of your some of your harsher placements is by getting into a management role where you're not necessarily doing the things that tax you so much about the day-to-day grind, and instead you're able to teach, to share, to mentor, to help other people learn, and you leverage some of those skills to make sure that you're not getting bogged down by the weaker parts of your chart. We also have a lovely exalted Venus in Pisces in the second house of finance. Girl, money's not a problem. money ain't no problem for you. That's glorious. I love that. As well, oh, get out of town. Get out of town with Jupiter in mutual reception. Oh, Tara, you've turned your chart around beautifully. So Venus is in Pisces, the sign of her exaltation. Jupiter, who rules Pisces, is in Taurus in the fourth house of family. You know, there is this idea of money and family being connected. There may be some sort of inheritance. There may be some sort of family money that comes forward to really help you out. But the idea that money is not an issue for you in your chart, I think is very, very important for us to understand. So with you, it's really about cultivating the leadership qualities and understanding that like the grunt work is really beneath you. Like you're not necessarily somebody who's supposed to be in the trenches. Like you're supposed to be shouting out orders from the rooftops to really make sure that other people can use your vision, your strategy, your Aries-oriented leadership to create to create some really good direction for other people who might not necessarily have that. And that's where the Aquarius ascendant really comes into. You know, what I love about Aquarius, when I think about that sign, I always think of the archetype of the hawk or the eagle, who's able to kind of look at the forest from a higher viewpoint and see what's around, and not necessarily get bogged down by each individual tree that people might be navigating through. So that's really how we leverage a lot of your chart, my dear. And I find that to be absolutely excellent. Yeah, the more I look at your chart, the more interesting it gets, because you've decided to put the sun in Aries exalted in the third house, ruling the seventh house of relationships, which is flawless. Communication issues might be an issue with relationships. You might get into very heated arguments because of that Mercury in Aries combust the sun. But I still like it, because having an exalted planet ruling your seventh house, you know, it gives a lot of spark, it gives a lot of fire, it gives a lot of passion. It also means that your spouse might be a teacher as well, and might be able to coach you or mentor you in that space. I like it. A moon in Gemini that I keep coming back to in the fifth, you know, you do have this secret creativity that I don't think that you let out as much, especially in the writing space. So I would encourage you at some point to write a book. I think it would be very helpful for you, not just for your, like, not for the financial aspects, because again, we don't need the financial aspects in your life. But when we look at the sun in Aries, and Mercury in Aries making a loose sextile to a Mercury in Gemini between the third and the fifth houses, there's this really nice dynamic for you specifically when it comes to writing and creativity. Excellent. Thank you, Tara, for donating your chart. I very, very much appreciate it. Good morning, Lucia. Lucia, I'll read your book, Tara. We just got done with yours, so you might need to watch the replay a little bit for that. And we are on to our last chart, who is Tony, little Bambino. So excited to read for Tony and give Mama some insight as to Tony's state. So we have a Libra ascendant, and y'all know, if you've been following me for any amount of time, how much I adore a Libra ascendant. A Libra ascendant just gives a pleasantness to the face, a symmetry to the body. It's a marker for beauty, and I really enjoy that. If it's not overpowered by this Mars and Aries making an opposition, we need to watch out for injury, Mama. If there is any chance of sports being a little bit too reckless, injury specifically to the face, into the body, which may be disfiguring in nature. That might be something that we would need to watch for just a little bit. The ruler of the chart is Venus in Sagittarius. Oh, what? I love it. Venus, oh my gosh. The more I look at this chart, so, I was talking about creative writing in the past, in the last chart, but this chart has the exact same dynamics, but turned up to 11. So here's what I really enjoy about this chart. We have the moon in Sagittarius, we have Jupiter in Sagittarius, who is in his natural rulership, and Venus, our other benefic in Sagittarius, being ruled by that Jupiter. So Jupiter as a planet that's known for prosperity, that's known for expansion, that's known for that really nice creative heat, abundance, in the third house of writing, teaching, communication, does make Tony very, very good at writing, communication, teaching. Then we have down in the fifth house of creativity, as well as children, the idea of the sun in Cazimi with Mercury within 1 degree of a conjunction in Aquarius in the fifth. Glorious. Absolutely glorious. So I think that all of this mental energy, I think all of this creative, communicative energy needs to be mobilized in the chart for sure. And I think that it's just beautiful. And I would really like to see what Tony ends up writing down, because there will be significant magic in it. There's a lot of connection between the fourth house of parents and the fifth house of children. And we have Saturn in Capricorn, Pluto in Capricorn, South Node in Capricorn in the fourth, which from an upbringing perspective does bring some scarcity. It does bring some heaviness, some strictness, some rules, focus, some oppression to a lesser extent, depending on how that's channeled. But all of that heaviness is ruling the fifth house of creativity. And I think that there is, as well, fourth house of family and fifth house of children, the idea of Tony having children in the world, and bringing not just a new life into the world, but having another vessel for his ideas to pour into, and actually having a child who carries out his legacy. Also, anytime we put the sun in the fifth, it's somebody who's going to be whose ego will be enriched by becoming a parent, which I really, really enjoy. And there will be a lot of creative fodder for Tony to chew through in his. Actually, the idea of him writing a children's book wouldn't be bad. Money will definitely be coming from spousal relationships because of that Mars and Aries in the seventh, ruling the second house of finance. So marrying wealthy would be something that Tony would be prone to. That moon in Sagittarius ruling the North Node in the 10th, again being famous for writing. That third house is really what I keep coming back to, because it's such a beautifully stacked part of his chart, and I wouldn't have it any other way for sure. One of the things that the more I look at that Mars and Aries, we would want to be just a little bit careful of domestic abuse situations, because there's also this Uranus and Aries ruled by the Mars and Aries. Uranus is that wild card, that unpredictability, that lightning strike in the seventh, and that 19-degree Mars opposing the ascendant Libra. I want to make sure that any relationships are calm, are civil, are nice, and are not necessarily in any way, shape, or form too violent or competitive. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? Hey Sue, how you doing? Love you. No, I mean, again, that Jupiter in Sag is so powerful. It's so beautiful. It's so well-placed, co-present with Venus and the Moon in the third of writing, teaching, communication. It's even ruling this Neptune and Pisces in the sixth, which is a very watery, very intuitive, very spiritual placement. and the 6th houses of work, and to have somebody who's in the creative arts process to have these placements, it's just absolutely beautiful. I find Tony's chart extremely creative. We just need to watch those relationships and make sure that they don't become detrimental to that creative process down the road. Excellent. Okay, everybody. That is it for our live stream today. Thank you so much for joining me for another 8 charts. I really hope that you had a great time. These are always really fun for me to do. If you'd like to see previous live streams, if you'd just like to hear about me talk about astrology all day, you can always go to the YouTube channel by searching in YouTube ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, which is my website. Speaking of my website, you can also sign up for consultations there. If you would like to pay me for my services, work a little bit one-on-one, maybe remediate the chart a little bit, as well as downloadable classes that you can just pay, click, and learn astrology with me. Also check out the new daily horoscope that I pumped out. Everybody really enjoyed that, so I'll continue to do that tomorrow. And until Friday when we do the live stream again, may the stars be ever in your favor.